Drone anxiety. Do you suffer from anxiety when you take this little fella out, or any of your other drones? As a beginner or even as an experienced flyer, it can be one of the biggest heartaches in drone flying. Here are 5 tips to help you conquer your fears when flying your drone. Let's do this. Welcome to the channel once again. Nobby Green here, and on with the latest video, drone anxiety. That's what today's video is all about, taking your drone out and not having the fear of what's going to happen next. So tip number 1, know where to fly. That's the biggest point in my opinion, is knowing where to fly. Are you going to be flying in the city, or are you going to be flying out in the field where there's nobody around? That is probably the best thing to do as a beginner, is to go out into the field in a nice open space and find out for yourself that actually flying a drone is as easier than you think. One of the best things or best tips that I can suggest is to do your research. Have a look round. Google Maps is your best friend. Looking onto Google Maps, you can change the layers on the Google Maps, as you can see just here. And you can find out and have a look round before you actually take off miles to where you think you're going to be wanting to fly. So that's tip number 1, knowing where to fly. Tip number 2, flying over water. I see a lot of comments on forums and Facebook groups and how people are frightened to death of flying over water. I've been flying drones now around about 7 years, and I must admit, when I first took off and flew over water, it frightened me to death. It really did. But when you think about it, that drone's up in the air over a field or over some nice landscape. It's the same as flying over water. A couple of tips to remember is, if you are flying over water, make sure you're always 3 to 5 meters above the water. Now, these drones have downward facing sensors and they have the vision system. If you go too low to the water, the chances are it could take a dive and there'll be nothing that you can do about it. Keeping your distance at least 3 to 5 meters above the water is going to help you. And once you get the confidence of flying over water, you'll be doing it every time. That's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is the fear of losing your drone. We all have that fear, everybody does. And if somebody tells me they don't have any fear about losing your drone, well, I'll call them a liar. The fear of losing your drone, especially something like the Mini 3 Pro, which will cost you, well, close on to £1,000 in the UK if you buy the Fly More kit. You can buy the drone on its own, as you know, but the fear of losing that drone is always going to be in the back of your mind. And a tip for this is just remember to have faith in your equipment. That's what it's all about, having faith in your drone. And just remember the safety features that are built into these little fellas. Well, all the drones, even the Mavic series, they've all got the return to home feature. So if you used to lose signal, you can guarantee that that drone is going to come back to you. So don't get anxious about losing your drone, because at the end of the day, there's so many built-in features in these drones. Like I've just said, the return to home. If you lose sight of your drone, you can always refer to the attitude indicator, or you can flip over to the map, and that will show you exactly where your drone is relative to the home point. So tip number 3, losing your drone, don't worry about it. If you lose it, it will come back. Moving on to tip number 4, crashing your drone. There's always a fear of going out and crashing your drone. There's no worse feeling, I'm sure, is to finding this little fella in bits on the ground, or it's stuck up a tree and you're fighting to find that drone. My advice on this one is make sure that you've got enough satellites locked before you even take off. Before you take off, make sure that there's at least 12 to 15 satellites registered on your controller. You take off before those satellites are locked and you fly off, hasn't registered the home point, there's a chance that it could fly away, or there's a chance that it could crash. One tip to avoid crashing your drone is take off and go straight up and have a look around. Have a look around at the surroundings, pan around all the way around, do a 360 and make sure you're high enough that you're not going to crash into any trees or any poles or power lines, although that's another story because it's very difficult to spot those, and your obstacle avoidance is not going to work against power lines. So like I say, take the drone up, have a look round, check what the altitude of the drone is when you're above everything, and then what you need to do is set your return to home height to exactly the same height as what you're already at. That way you're in a safe position that if it does signal and it decides to return to home, it's going to raise to that set height and come back safely. Another thing to avoid crashes is to check your weather. Make sure that the weather conditions are suitable for flying the drones. These little fellas, the Mini 3, they do handle the wind fairly well. They've got a level 5 wind resistance. However, it could be more windier upstairs than it is lower down near the ground. So make sure that you check the gust. A good app for that is airdata.com. And that'll give you all the different relative heights and what the wind gusts are, because it's all about the gusts. Like I say, you might have a wind speed at 20 mile an hour and it's gusting at 50 mile an hour. So bear that in mind. Check your weather conditions before you fly. Tip number 5, drone confrontation. This is one that I think most people fear. It's only ever happened to me a couple of occasions, but they're not all bad. Most members of the public just want to know what you're doing, and why not communicate with them. What I generally do is tell them that I'm flying a drone and that I will talk to them as soon as I've landed it. I have compiled a list, a cheat sheet if you like, with some links to the CAA website, which you can hand out to people and they can be reading that while you're flying your drone. Like I said before, not all confrontations are bad, and most people will just want to have a chat with you. Oh, can I have a look at your drone? What's it doing? How far does it fly? Usual questions that you can get asked. Just remember, if you're confronted by the police for any reason, they have the right to make you land your drone if they think there's an offence being committed. So there is that to bear in mind. One thing you can do to avoid confrontation is not be there. I know that sounds daft, but keep yourself out of view. You know, hide behind a tree or just keep in the shade somewhere. Flying from your car is another good one, and I tend to do that quite a lot. It just gives you the opportunity to be out of the way from the public. I know it's difficult sometimes if you're flying in the city, standing in a shop doorway, but keeping out of the way, in my opinion, is a good idea. And the bonus tip, if you want to call it a bonus tip, always fly visual line of sight. I mean, we've had these new rules come out, new regulations, keeping within visual line of sight is always a good thing. And I know it's very difficult to do at some stage, but keeping that drone in visual line of sight and making sure that you can see which way it's facing and the orientation of the drone, that's the old purpose of it. The biggest thing with visual line of sight is you're looking down at your controller and you look up at the sky and you see your drone, you look back down at your screen again, and before you know it, you've lost sight of it. These things can just disappear. In my opinion, they're the wrong colour, they just blend in with the sky. A good way around that is to fit some external strobes, but that will take it over the 249 gram limit. So if you've got the A2 CFC, you can still fly in the same category if it's slightly over the weight. So there we go, just a couple of tips for you there on drone anxiety and how to deal with it. Basically, just go out and do it. The more that you fly, the more confident you're going to get. So hope you've enjoyed the video and you've found it useful, you got something out of it. If you did, don't forget, give us the old thumbs up. And if you're new around here, why don't you consider subscribing, dinging the dong and all the rest of it that goes with it. And we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.